the nature of an arum is also that you can just get sort of swept up in it. I think what's unique today with the lack of that arum is that, today the big thinking of today is ownership. We're going to own, today's generation wants to own its Yiddishkeit and own its Iskashrus, which means almost like I want to opt in.
Welcome to Homesick for Lubavitch, a podcast where we explore Lubavitch identity in the year 2024. My name is Bentzi and I will be your host. Let's begin. Alrighty, so I am here with Rabbi Ruvi, Boca Raton. Thank you very much for making the time on a Tuesday morning. I figured that I'd give a little bit of a background because for some who've listened, they'll know that I've interviewed your older brother Moshe. He's your oldest brother, right?
Yeah.
Moshe.
Yeah.
And so he gave a lot of your family background and about your grandparents, your parents, like Australia that you grew up in. But one of the interesting things that we spoke about then was he spoke about how when he came to America, he first went to the Miami Yeshiva, and the whole kind of introduction into 770 was a very methodical, individualized approach. Mm-hmm. Whereas he felt that by the time you came, things had changed a lot. And so I think it would be very interesting to kind of jump off over there and talk a little bit about how things changed in those years. Unless you'd like to correct the record about what he said about your upbringing or your grandparents, I'm happy if you'd like to, but I feel like that would be an interesting place to start.
Okay, so this is a sequel to my brother's interview.
Yes.
I sort of figured that was happening because he kept making some references to me, so I figured that eventually...
it wasn't planned.
It wasn't planned.
It was not planned.
Okay. Well, yes, we did grow up in the same place and generally the same time, but I would say in slightly different circumstances, partially to his credit or to his own experiences. In a way, he was a trailblazer and sort of solace aderech for his younger brothers, particularly me, I think, as the youngest. So what I mean by that, for example, if we're going to refer back to that interview, he spoke a lot about the war that he went through to break away from high school and go into Yeshiva Gedola. So, by the time I decided I wanted to do the same thing, it was nowhere near, the temperature was nowhere near as hot, because he had already sort of opened that door. It was still something that was uncommon. It was just a few hardcore anash that didn't go to high school and did what was called then Olei Torah and then went on to Yeshiva Gedola. But, so he paved the way. So my experience is not exactly the same, but in many ways to his credit.
Yeah, so in many ways the younger brother is always a kind of sequel of their older brother until they aren't.
Are you a younger brother?
I'm the older brother.
Yeah, I spent all my life wearing hand-me-downs for my older brothers.
Right, everybody telling you this is what your older brother did.
Which brother you're going to be like.
Right, until you aren't. So that's how much this will be a sequel. It'll be a sequel until it isn't. But what's your take, or maybe describe, now that you've kind of laid down that a lot of it was following him or following his path, where did that path, or just describe a little bit what it was like for you going to New York. What was, he described the shluchim coming to Australia. He remembers the first group. By your time, how many years younger are you than him?
10.
10. So 10 years already. It was
5 kvutzos later.
5 kvutzos later, it became like a norm. So what was Lubavitch like to you at that point? What was it like for you? Just describe a little bit your experience of how you saw. You're in Australia, on the other end of the world. How do you see Lubavitch?
So, the overall culture that he describes is pretty much true. And when I say the culture, talking about of the school, yes, it was Lubavitch school, but it was a community school.
Right.
The Rebbe was certainly not at the forefront of, discourse. We had rallies and we'd sing Keli Ato, and Yudas Kislev was like a big day, it'd be Tammuz. So the Lubavitch culture was there, but the focal point was not necessarily Deir Shvi. As you know, the founders of the community were, had come, the 5 families. They created a certain culture, Lubavitch culture, like the Fabrengens, Shabbos Vorchim, but the talk. It was not Deir Shvi. It was classic, old school Chassidish Fabrengens. Even Rabbi Groner.
What do you mean by Der Shvi? The Mashiach?
No, I'm not talking about Mashiach. I'm talking about focal point on the Rebbe, on his kashrus. It was more, even Rabbi Groner, who Fabringed, occasionally had a few big Fabrengens the year were at his house, even Purim. Right. Purim was a big Fabreng and Cholam Shvishal Pesach. So he waxed nostalgic a lot about the Frierdiker Rebbe.
Really?
About Reb Shmuel. These were his formative years, right. And he romanticized them a lot. This is not a critique. I'm just talking about you asking about the Lubavitch culture.
Yeah.
And
it was definitely not. I remember him. It was definitely not your typical Der Shvi. He didn't speak that language so much.
Although he
lived it though.
No, he evolved.
Okay.
He evolved. There's no question. He spoke at my wedding, which was L'Chav Ches Sivan, right? The day that Rebbe arrived in America. We're actually sitting and talking right now. Today's Tes Oder, the Frierdiker Rebbe came. He actually spoke about the fact that he was from the few people who were at both events.
Wow. He
was there Tes Oder and he was there Chav Ches Sivan. And, this is Tafshin Nun. He was all in. Mashiach, the Rebbe, was like, he definitely, his whole sprach had changed a lot. I wasn't there in Melbourne to see this whole evolution, but I saw it at my wedding. So, but if you look at the Yechidus that the Rebbe had with the first shluchim in Tafshin Chav Zayin, which is, by the way, the year I was born, was the year that the first Kvutza came. The Rebbe said that their goal, their role is to make Melbourne to a Chassidish Stadt, and to, I don't know if he used the Sprach Hiskashus, which is actually also in today's Yem Yem, but the Rebbe understood the Chassidim that were there then, they had created a certain culture, and that the Shluchim were going to bring Deir Shvi, they were going to bring the brand to a whole new generation. And they were absolutely, it was actually a totally transformational point in the whole evolution of Lubavitch in Melbourne. So my brother Moshe was already 13. No, he was actually 10 then, I guess, when the first Kvutza came. Already impressionable. And slowly but surely, they started this quite a revolution of bringing, Deir Shvi to Melbourne.
So by the time you grow up, you grow up 10 years later, or let's say 10 years later, which is already 10 years into it.
Yeah.
The whole landscape has changed at that point.
It's changing. They were a big part of our lives. My first real recollection is quotes of Internalizing Satan Lovashon. I mean, they were like they were rock stars in Melbourne when they arrived. It was like the Yanks. We called them the Yanks, and Australians. This Australian culture, b'chlal, are into nicknames. It's like this. Every Yank had his own nickname. Some of them, I think, heard about these names for the first time. Like Lipa Dubrovsky, all of a sudden, he was dubbed Elvis. I'm not even sure you ever heard of Elvis, but he had this rich, deep voice, and he was very handsome and blue eyes, and he looked like a rock star. So they were just iconic when they arrived. The whole school, don't know if the whole school members, but a big portion of the school came to greet them, dancing in the airport, and introduction to the community. So they were very key players in formulating. But to talk about the landscape, it was a process. It took years and years until it really took root. But it started very organically, one bocher at a time, one kid at a time.
So even at your point, what you're saying is, even when you're growing up, it wasn't like the whole place had shifted entirely. It was easier for you to follow the path of your brother, but it wasn't like everyone was doing that either.
No.
It was still quite new and quite unique.
Like growing up as a kid in Melbourne, life generally revolved around sports.
Footy
in the winter, cricket in the summer, cricket, tennis. Everything else around it was sort of secondary.
Sure.
You came to school primarily for the breaks. Everything in between was just fillers.
Right.
And that was totally prevalent, during my school years.
I played in the same courtyard as you did, probably.
Oh, yeah?
I was there for a few years.
In high school?
No, I was there in elementary.
Oh.
Yeshiva College. We played footy. I'm pretty sure that building on Balaclava. No, it's on Hotham. On Hotham. That first building, was it?
Yeah, the schoolyard was the hallowed ground.
I'm saying it was always that building, right?
Yeah,
the building right next to the shul.
Behind,
right behind, yeah.
And the playground in between.
Yeah.
Now they've added playgrounds. But this is hallowed ground.
Yeah. So we played on the same yard.
Yeah, this is where life happened.
I wasn't very good at footy in the day, but
you had
so some of your nephews were much better. David and Shimi. Those were your only and the Gutniks.
And the Gutniks.
Yeah, all the others had left. But anyway, so I know what you're talking about.
They all inherited from their uncles,
They inherited from their uncles. Say it. It does usually run in the family. So to talk a little bit about you're following a journey. So in a way that makes it more interesting, because on one hand it would seem like my older brother did it. I'm also going to do it. But describe a little bit what's different, because you don't go to Miami. And I'm not just trying. I don't want to keep on going referring back to your brother. I think eventually we'll kind of break out into its own parsha. But I do believe generally that something happened there. Something changed in those 10 years between your brother coming to America. Let's say in the late Lamids or early Mems, I suppose.
Him?
Yeah.
Him late Lamids, yeah.
Okay, and you coming the late Mems. A lot had changed.
Yeah. So.
Wait, so you came less than 10 years after him.
I guess. Yeah, probably 10 years. I think he came Lamed and I came Memhei.
Okay.
Yeah, so there's a few factors here. Again, just to go back to the culture of Melbourne, the first time I really remember the Rebbe being a focal point was right after Simchas Torah Lamed Ches. I was 10 years old, 11. I remember there being a rally, school coming together, singing Tillim. It was my first memory of something like, let's call it, very Rebbe-centric. And then I remember the following year, Akofis, one of the shluchim, Nochem Shapiro, was the master of the Bezdin. He got up and he was, very fiery about this Akof and talking about what happened the year before. And then I remember that sort of sat with me. Personally, it's actually everything. Shlocha Pratis, we're having this conversation on Tes Adar. I guess we're not going to be able to escape my brother. Today's his anniversary, Baisha's anniversary.
Mazel tov.
Yeah, so the reason I mentioned that is because this is the first time I came to New York. So he got married in Montreal.
Right.
It's actually the same kviyas as this year, which meant, so the wedding was in Montreal. My first experience with the Rebbe was Purim, Tavshin Mem.
After the wedding, you came down to New York?
Yeah, it was middle of Shabbat, we came to New York for the Fabring, which was Sunday night. So this was my first...
Whose idea was it to come? Your father?
To come where?
To the Fabring.
Well, the whole Shabbat Brachas migrated from Montreal to New York. So this was my first brush with 770. We seen the Rebbe being by Fabrenga, but I just turned 13. and was also my first and last Yechidus. It was still Yechidus then, right after Purim.
Which year was this?
Tavshin Mem. So, for me personally, this was just I would call it my first brush with this reality. But it was too quick, and I was too young to really process it. Then, to my good fortune, my next brother, he also got married a year and a half later. He got married Chav Beis Elul, Tavshin Mem Aleph, which means a week before Rosh Hashanah. So I ended up spending, me and my older brother Chaim Levashon spent Tishrei Mem Beis in New York. That was life-changing. That was...
Who do you stay by? Your family there?
Crazily enough, my brother, who had just gotten married a week before Rosh Hashanah, we basically stayed in his apartment, and him and his newlywed wife, which is pretty crazy.
It sounds like a younger brother thing to do.
Well, it sounds like an older brother thing to do, to have been so open. It was pretty crazy. We didn't force it, So they didn't have much of a honeymoon. Went straight into Tishrei, and me and my brother staying there, and Australians, a couple of Australians hanging out. So that was life-changing. That by the time that Tishrei was over, I was like all in, and my whole paradigm shifted. I didn't see myself now as just an Australian kid who has some Lubavitch affinity, and I saw, no, this is me. This is where I want to be. And from that point on, I was just biding my time until I get back to where I really want to be. This is it.
That's when you became homesick for Lubavitch, is what you're saying.
Total. Well, yeah, the day I got on the plane to go back to Melbourne, I got homesick for Lubavitch. Yeah.
The day you got on the plane after Tishrei. After Tishrei, yeah. It's so interesting because it sounds like such a different, Lubavitch-wise, it sounds like such a different world. Like the idea that today you would say that, you're a Lubavitch kid growing up in a different city, and so therefore you're not totally revolving around the Rebbe and like the core of Lubavitch. Like that idea doesn't exist anymore. Like, right? You could say it's technology, but I don't think it's technology. Like it seems like back then it was still very similar to how it used to be back in the day in Russia even, where like there was a Rebbe, there's a chutzner of the Rebbe around him, and then there are the cities with the communities, and some people go to visit the Rebbe from time to time. But like your life doesn't revolve around Lubavitch; it revolves basically around your city. Right? And you're connected through different ways to that, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's what it sounds like it was when you were growing up, and today that's just so foreign. Like that whole model doesn't exist.
Well, yeah, for me it also shifted once I came back.
But today, even before you would go to 770, you would be educated for it to revolve around 770, right? Like if you were growing up in Melbourne today, even though it's after Gimel Tammuz, right, you would still be brought up that like the core and the center is New York, or the core and center is the Rebbe, right?
Yeah, definitely shifted there. Again, I go back a lot, but like to Melbourne, so I sort of see superficially what I see. Obviously, first of all, the school body has changed a lot. It's predominantly Lubavitch, and now you have a cheder, and just like the whole staff it's a whole new staff, a whole new generation. So it definitely is more, if you want to call it Rebbe-centric, than like us growing up, with the old guard, definitely. And then, so if you want to, I listened to the interview with. Conversation you had with my brother Moshe, and I was trying to pinpoint him. So he's looking for some tipping point, and which made me think about what is the tipping point, which is like this transition from everything becoming much more, about the Rebbe, and like for me, inconceivable that I go to Miami. Like I'm not going anywhere else but New York. That's where I want to be. So it's hard to it's hard to put your finger on anything specific. And then there's the arum, and then there's what's going on in your own life. So really, the only vantage point and paradigm that I can speak from is from my own experience. So having come back to Melbourne now, like lit up, so now I'm just more receptive to things. So, like, let's say the shluchim. Okay, so yes, I was there, and they always had, so they ran Mesilas Shabbos, and they gave shiurim to high school students, throughout the week. That was, but now having been in New York, I was just, more receptive to a deeper level of what they had to offer. Then, also technology started to change. Of course, early technology was talking about hookups. That wasn't even so common in Melbourne. It started to kick in, in the late 70s, or early 80s, where every Fabringen was now broadcast live, quote unquote.
Audio.
The hookup. Audio, yeah. So that also was a shift. And if you were in the quote unquote Olitera program, and there was a Fabringen, so that was most of your day, right? Because the Fabringens were like either 11:30 a.m. started Melbourne time or 1:30 p.m. So started paying more attention to that.
Right.
And I happened to have one of the teachers in the Olitera program, so I was probably 14 or 15. He was a Getter Chassid. He was not all that excited that we're taking off 4 hours, of the day to listen to a Fabringen. So, and he loved to pick on me in particular because he was a good friend with my brothers. So he wanted to make sure that I was not, messing around, that I could actually repeat at least some of the teichen of the Fabringen. So to his credit, I spoke about this actually last year in Melbourne to Skislev. I have a book of my own hanuchas. To whatever extent, a notebook, to whatever extent I could transcribe while the Rebbe was speaking. So this is from 14, 15 years old. I'm writing so that I should be able to repeat him at least some teichen of the Fabringen. So all of this is gradually, it's becoming more immersive. And then my next chance to jump on to a plane and come back to New York was 2 years later, to Shinem Dalet. I was itching, aching to go back to New York.
What was so powerful about New York? I know I emphasize this with your brother also, but it's worth emphasizing again because you take it for granted, but a lot of people listening may not know it. Like, you grew up in a very, very comfortable setup life, right? Like you weren't missing. It wouldn't seem like you grew up missing something at home, right?
Yeah, no, not at all.
Parents are wonderful people. They had made a beautiful life for you. Australia is a beautiful place to live.
Uh-huh.
Like the story of my life wasn't working, so I found something else over there. I went running.
Yeah.
It doesn't seem like that would be the story for you.
No,
So,
but it was not like that. It was what it was. I think bringing my life really to life, which means bringing the things that I had learned about, just really bringing them to life. So I'll give you an example. I mentioned this in a GEM interview. Tekiyas. So, so growing up in Melbourne, okay, it's beautiful. Balabatisha Shul Rosh Hashanah was very uplifting. Rabbi Groner was incredible Bal Tefillah,
Oh, yeah.
And I know every bitchivke of his nusach, as most Melburnians do. And the Chaim Sabransky, Olav Shalom, was a very Chassidish Yid.
Chaim Sabransky? Arum.
Yeah, Chaim was a Bal Tikeya.
Who's Chaim? I guess I didn't meet him.
Chaim was Bar's older brother.
Older brother. The one that eventually moved to New York?
Yeah.
Okay, so I did.
He was the quintessential Chassidish Balabos, because he owned a business.
I see.
But he was a very Chassidish Yid. He was the Bal Tikeya.
And their father also lived there at the time.
Reb Zalman, yeah. I'm talking now specifically about the Kiyas.
I see.
So I'm just giving an illustration of not pshat that I was missing something, but what I sort of experienced on a whole different level. So, okay, Rosh Hashanah, we gave in the talk, however you want to describe it. But then I remember standing by Tkiyas, by the Rebbe for the first time. This is Membe, so I'm 13 years old. So I have a cousin, Yankee Barber, sort of today in New York.
Sure. Yeah.
So
he taught me for a year.
yeah. So he was the seasoned guy. So there was a bench, a side bench. In other words, a bench on its side, right on the side of the washing machine. And the washing machine is the area in front of the bimah.
Right.
And next to that, there's benches and then the platform with Rebbe stood by Fabrengen. Anyway, so he created the quote-unquote Australian bench, which means to qualify, you have to be Australian, right? I'm the youngest one. So he's like the captain. He's like the captain of the ship because he's at the front, and I'm in the back because I'm the youngest.
Wait, this is one bench?
One bench.
How many people are on this one bench?
It's one bench. First of all, it's about a 6-foot bench. There's about 12 guys on it. And not only that, but it's turned on its side. So you're not, because next to us on the left is a bench that's flat. So that gives them a few inches on us. The only reason he could create it was to turn on its side, so we're 4 inches lower than the bench to the left of us. You understand? So I'm mentioning that because you didn't have flat footing. You weren't standing on the flat side of the bench. You're standing on the side of the bench. So most of your foot is off the bench.
You have 2 inches. Yeah.
And I'm on the back, which means behind me is the first row of benches behind the Rebbe. Point, excruciating pain. You say, oh, this Australian kid, coming from this very balabatish home, like, what are you missing? Or like, what, are you crazy? You went from a beautiful Kaflu Rosh Hashanah to excruciating pain most of davening. I remember walking out, well, not only me, but everyone, walking out of Rosh Hashanah. You were drenched. You felt you'd come out of a washing machine. You look at the pages of the Machzeh by Rosh Hashanah, crunched. I was like, but, like, Bama Nachshafu. But I remember seeing Tkiyas and thinking to myself, oh my God, this is Binyan HaMalchus. This is Binyan HaMalchus. This is happening right here, right now, before my eyes. You see the Pidyanis, the letters, the bags on the bimah. I was like, wow, we talk about Yichim, Yomus, the fate of the world is being written, the script is being written. It's happened. This is it. This is it. It was like, so after that, it was like, with all due respect to the Gehaven Rosh Hashanah in Melbourne, this is like, this is where it's at. So it wasn't like it was missing something, but it just opened up a whole different level of reality. And it's like, why would you want to be anywhere else once you've tasted that?
Mm-hmm. Do you remember any part of Rosh Hashanah besides the Tkiyas?
Yeah, I mean, the main highlights of Rosh Hashanah.
I'm saying, was it David? Because with Rabbi Gruner, you talked about the Nusach.
Yeah.
With the Rebbe, it's always, or I shouldn't say always. Here, you spoke about the Tkiyas.
Yeah.
And it usually is what people speak about. Do you remember the Nusach of the davening in Rosh Hashanah, or you're too busy pushing for a place for the Tkiyas?
Well, me personally, being into music and whatever, yes, I did. And I learned the style over the years of Yossel Weinberg and Berkowitz and whoever the Bali Tefillah were. I definitely paid some attention to that.
No, but you know what I mean.
But it was nothing like Groner. It was nothing like that. Of course, the singing in 770 was so incredibly inspiring. Thousands of people singing together, and the Rebbe conducting, with his movements on the standard. Avinu Malkeinu or whatever, singing Rosh Hashanah was as much as singing Yom Kippur, but
my question is, in Australia, it would seem like you remember your experience, like what you were doing on Rosh Hashanah, right? Because as much as Rabbi Groner or Sarbransky are figures, it's not so revolved around them that. Rosh Hashanah is a Gehaven Yom Tov for like, how did I feel? Right? How did I daven and so on? My question is if people felt the same way in 770, or if it was like the Rebbe's presence was too powerful to pay like, what am I going to pay attention to how I feel or how I'm davening on Rosh Hashanah? Like,
Well, I mean, first of all, what you said about Melbourne, I'm not sure was that accurate, because the big buzz after Yom Tov was always, how did Corona do today?
Okay, fair.
And Corona was always eager to hear feedback too. In fact, he waited every Mitzvah Rosh Hashanah for my mother to call, because my mother was the big maven, and give him, the gushpanka on his davening. So
right,
it wasn't like
your mother's a singer. For those who don't know, your mother's a singer.
She's big maven, and Rabbi Corona knew that, so he always waited for her call, and made him very happy.
That's funny.
So he loomed big. And his davening, his voice was large, and his davening was large. It was big. It loomed big. So I wouldn't say it was all just about your own personal spiritual experience.
No, but I didn't say. No, I understand that, but it seems like there was room for the. That's what Balbatishkeit is ultimately. Ich bin echt a Mensch. I also have a seat, right? I have my little place.
Right. So.
Right. In 770, was there room for that, or was it, or like do you remember your davening on Rosh Hashanah in 770? Is that like even a thing, or is it like, no, what do you mean that's like Kener b'fnei avoka, like talking about my davening, like?
Well, look, I'm reflecting back on it now. I would say b'shaitei. No, b'shaitei. It's. I guess the only sense of self-awareness is, let's say in my case, that I have the opportunity to see this, to bear witness to this pure truth, But b'shaitei, no, it's all about the bittul to the moment and to the experience that you're a part of. But then, to internalize anything, you have to personalize it and process it. In a way, if it's not at all about you, then that becomes makif. I mean, it has to relate back to you. So I think it's a difference between. It's sort of like, you're a videographer or photographer. You're like you're observing, an experience. But when you're like in it, you just lose yourself, and to really immerse and to be present to the moment, you just allow yourself to be completely absorbed into the moment, and then you can process it later.
Absolutely, it makes total sense. I mean, it's also. I was actually speaking with your father-in-law the other day, and this is what one of the things we were talking about was Chaim Shadrzin, and we were speaking about that, like, because he was talking about how when there's too much bittul or too much self-nullification, it can become a pathology where a person feels worthless, and that's not the intention. But of course, there are moments where bittul is absolutely appropriate, right? Like, and Chassidus talks about this at length, where like the Talmud lifnei Rabbi, right? B'fnei Rabbi, when the Talmud's in front of the Rav, then bittul is not only appropriate, it's necessary, because otherwise you're not a keli, you're not open to receiving, you're not going to grow if you're always self-aware, right? Because then your self-awareness gets in the way. And so the tension is to be able to have that moment and then come back to yourself and change yourself as well, right? So, I mean, absolutely, it rings true 100%. The reason I'm pointing at it is because, because then you said earlier that once you had it once, you wanted to have it, you wanted to move back there, which makes sense. I mean, you see that kind of drama, why would you, and you feel like it's available to you, why wouldn't you want to have more of it? But then if you throw yourself into the soup, right? You don't go to Miami on the way to 770. When do you have an opportunity to internalize it if you're constantly there?
Okay, well, I had the opportunity because I had breaks, in between. Came back after Tishrei Mem Beis, and I wasn't there, till 2 years later.
I'm talking about later, once you came back.
Okay, but you just reminded me now. If I remember coming back after Tishrei, and most Australians had never been to New York, certainly not for Tishrei. And I remember describing it to a guy, a Chassidish guy.
Your age, or like a
little older. And then he starts telling me about Simchas Torah and whatever in Melbourne. I'm like,
buddy,
are you serious? I mean, what do you? By the way, Rabbi, I forgot about this. A book came out about Rabbi Groner, larger than life. So there's actually a footnote there in the book. He mentions me. And I remember now. I recall the story. I'd forgotten it.
But the author mentions you.
Yeah, he had heard this. He had heard this from Rabbi Groner. So this is Tishrei Mem Gimel. So this is the Tishrei in between. So, Rabbi Groner also led the whole Akofis. Right. You know, could you imagine? He's standing in the middle of the dance floor, and he's leading the Akofis. So Melbourne was it's a Balbatisha community. A lot of the members of the community, not necessarily Anash.
Right.
So he's sang a lot of Veltish songs, during Akofis. I came back, was on fire. I wasn't going to allow any of that. So I started leading the Nigunim by Akofis, a little pisher, 14 years old. And Rabbi Groner announced he's officially relinquishing control of Akofis to me. He couldn't stop it. Not in a bad way. He did. He said that he's yielding.
This is how he survived as a Rav of that community for decades. He knew which fights to pick.
This is to his credit, So, so I had a chance. And then it was after Mem Dalet that I made the decision I'm not continuing with high school, which I said was made much easier by my brother Moshe having already, paved that path for me. So I ended up going into Yeshiva Gedela young. Actually, the policy up until that point, you went to YG after you graduated, matric, which is like 18. They made an exception. Myself and Mendy Groening went into YG at 16. So then, and then I had roommates with the shluchim who were there. And these were just fantastic guys who were Chassidish Chavra, Yosef Perovich, Yen Shur, Shalom Reichik, Michal Gerari, Storli Rosenfeld, and there's a Hallam, I think was the sixth. So I really got very close with them. And so this to the point of Miami. So now they add another layer to this, which is Oletere. Oletere was like not on the radar. People in Melbourne had heard of Morristown. My older cousin of Remy knew. Learned at Yeshiva in Morristown. A bunch of guys 5, 6, 7, 8 years older than me. It's like either if you're going to Lubavitch Yeshiva, either you went to Chabad or Morristown. No one ever heard of Oletere.
They hadn't heard of it, or they couldn't understand?
Nobody in Melbourne ever heard of Oletere. It was like just not on anyone's radar.
Mm-hmm. Why not? It was a new yeshiva,
Oletere.
Or they thought it was a crazy place.
No. For many years, Oletere was a local institution.
I see.
Only in the early MEMS did it start attracting bochrim from out of town and started to become more of an international yeshiva. So when I came to the Zal, the big buzz was 90 bochrim in the Zal. Like, wow.
In Oletere.
Yeah, like, wow. It was like, Oletere was like now going to a whole nother level. So Oletere was transitioning now to becoming this big, international yeshiva. But it was just starting. These guys...
So until the MEMS, the norm was not to come to be by the Rebbe until you were much older.
Until 770, yeah.
So you had to...
Actually, I should say either...
After shlichus even, because there were shlichus already.
Huh?
770 was after shlichus.
Yeah. So actually, the three yeshivas were Chabad, Morristown, or Montreal. A bunch of guys went to Montreal.
Right.
But 770, what you came to when you were 22, 23... Either, if you're an Australian, Lavdafka, you went on shlichus, but you may have gone through other systems, and the system was not, the pathway was not as clean or whatever as it is now. But 770, you were an older, 22, 23.
Maybe that's a tipping point. If you're looking for a tipping point, that could easily be a tipping point.
Coming younger. So this was the first wave of Australians starting to come to Oletere, younger. So, and a lot of that was influenced by these bochrim, who, half the kfutza was Morristown, half were Oletere. All gewaltige Chassidish Chavra. But I had a real close connection with the guys from Oletere, and I started to hear stories about the Rabbi Yisrael, about Rabbi Gilitsky, and about Rabbi Nachman. So they became like mythical figures to me. And So
That's what it was. It was Rabbi Yisrael that attracted you to all the Torah.
I'm just
I
hearing
mean, Marsan
stories.
is their melech. I mean, they had people there too.
Yeah, I'm not saying they didn't. And
It wasn't being next to the Rebbe in 770.
yeah, so that was all part of that.
I see.
And by the way, the Melech's future Edom, Michal
Michal
Garari,
Garari.
was one of the Bochum in one of the Shulchim in Melbourne. And it's a geweldige geheimene guy. He's from Morristown. Morristown. So he actually used to talk all about Melech.
Interesting.
Ended up becoming his Edom. So, but it was that, yeah, no. It was all the Torah. It was not just about the Anhola. It was also, it was an annex to 770. So I'm hearing about in Rapinya and going to Kriya on Mondays and Thursdays. It was like a whole annex to 770. So, I was just chomping at the bit to be able to leave YG and come to Holy Torah. So here also, Baruch Hashem, my next brother, Chaim, Olav Shalom, he got married at the beginning of Memhei. And I saw this as an opening. Even though that Anhola in Melbourne made it unequivocal, they're not going to give me the shus to leave because I'm still 18. Even though I'd already, even though I'd already served 2 years in Melbourne, but I'm 18, so that's not the protocol.
Yeah, Rabbi Cohen's very into protocols.
Yeah, so I came to New York and I had to devise a plan. So I went to Torah to see, this place that I'm hearing about from, and you feel, compare the Zal in Melbourne, this beautiful, Then
Well, it used to be like a vacation home for the royalty or something.
For royalty, yeah. To this dingy basement on Troy Avenue.
And we haven't even spoken about the Union Street mikveh yet.
Yeah. Well, we had other mikvahs before we got there. And this dingy basement. And the noise.
Where was this basement?
On Troy.
It was only a basement at the time.
Yeah.
What was upstairs?
It was the shul, the Reiner shul.
Ah, so the
Zal was in the basement.
Ugh.
Stuffy, overcrowded, never enough chairs. And if you took the risk of going to the bathroom, you were going to come back, you were not going to have a chair until the next guy went to the bathroom. So every time Rabbi Yosef Rosenfeld, Olav Shalom, used to visit the Zal, we used to start this quiet chant, "We need chairs. We still need chairs." Till this thunderous thing, we still need chairs. Eventually, they replaced the chairs with benches, which somewhat alleviated the problem. But I was also I could not believe the thunderous noise. The Zal in Melbourne was almost a library next to the thunder of Holy Torah. So I had heard so much about the Rabbi Yisrael, he was my first go-to. And I said to him, I want to join the Yeshiva. He took an instant liking to me, this Australische, chocoladnike. He said, we'll be happy to have you, but you need a zettel, you need a shus. So I wrote to the Rebbe, and the Rebbe answered. I said, I want to come to the Rebbe answered me, "Kim b'furusim katzasa anhola." So it wasn't clear to me which anhola the Rebbe was referring to. So I went back to the Yisrael, and he said, the Rebbe means the anhola that you're coming from, obviously. So now I'm in a quandary. How am I going to accomplish this? Anyway, I'll never forget, I was staying in the Crown Hotel on Crown Street, because it was right after my brother's wedding, and with trepidation I call. Mamash, my hand is shaking. I call YG and Yeshiva Gedela, and I'm praying that Rabbi Bosovsky picks up the phone. Rabbi Olav Shalom, who just passed away, he was the mashgiach. He was also the Anholas Yeshiva, and he picked up the phone. I said to him, "I want to stay in New York, and I need your rishus." And he said, "Listen, if you're going to come back to Melbourne, and all you're going to be thinking about is that you want to be in New York, better you should stay in New York." And I'm like, yes, jumping for joy. Years and years later, just a few years ago, I went up to Mr. Bosovsky. I never really thanked you to give that Kodesh Atayv. You changed my life. You gave me my ticket, to the Rebbe, to freedom, to New York. So that's it. So now, now I'm in Holy Torah. Now I'm in and that was, if Tishrei and whatever, life-changing, this is a whole nother level of a life-changing experience.
Did it ever get old?
Huh?
Did it ever get old?
What?
Like once you have what you wanted from afar, it loses its
luster,
Yeah.
its glitter. I don't know. I don't think so. You know, I'm still coming from Australia. It's still all somewhat b'derech ischadrus for me. Also, in Old Torah, so it's like the rock stars of Old Torah were Shir Dalet. So it's not like, it wasn't like all the same. It was like in Old Torah itself. It was like sort of this graduation. I started in Shir Beis, you know, and looking up, Shir Dalet was actually your uncle, Yudi, and
In Altera.
yeah, they were the Shir Dalet guys. And they were like
Nasi Nemes,
all those guys. They were sort of like the rock stars of the Zal. And once different privileges kicked in at Shir Dalet, you could go to Kriya and without having to chazer remind me to the pinya and whatever. And I was just like, you were like getting ready to go on shlichus. Another level. You were like the leaders of the Zal. So even within Old Torah, it was like, you're looking to the day when you're going to be the guys, you know, you're going to be in Shir Dalet. Also, the teachers changed, the mashpim changed. So it wasn't like the same, wasn't on like repeat, you know. So Shir Beis, Rabbi Galitsky, there's the whole geschmack in of itself. He's such a beautiful person, such a warm and loving person. It was just beautiful.
Teddy bear.
Yeah. We were very, and Mashpios Fitcher Pevsner also.
Also very nice guy, yeah.
So, beautiful, sweet memories. And then Shir Gimel, Rabbi Yisrael, he's actually Shir Gimel and Shir Dalet, and Rabbi Nachman. My class, we got very close to Rabbi Nachman, very close. And we did not let him live. We verbringed Kimat every Thursday night. And we also crashed his house almost every Friday night. Also had some very memorable verbringers with Rabbi Pekarsky, who was the Menal. So, no, it was exciting. It was just very exciting.
What was the place, or was there a place for internalizing when things are coming at you so fast and heavy? Because before, when I asked you the question, you said that you went back to Australia for a year in between, but now you're in the soup, like you're there.
Yeah. I think that might be a more loaded question than you maybe even realize, or maybe not. I think, in a way, at least for me personally, I think I had to really start confronting that question after Gimel Tammuz. Because, in some way, until Gimel Tammuz, there was always the arum, you know. Whatever the arum looked like, there was an arum that you were a part of. And after Gimel Tammuz, that whole arum changed. And I think, and it took me a long time myself to even get to that point where to realize that arum has changed. And now you have to look internally, okay, how deeply did you actually process all of it? How real was it all? So, and I'm still answering this question, by the way.
Yeah, because when I think about a tipping point or things changing, it would seem that the answer I'm getting from you is that in general, with tipping points, what happens is that things build up slowly until they hit a critical mass, and then suddenly it tips. Like they say, gradually, then suddenly, right? And it would seem like what happened is that, like the core of Lubavitch for so long, or at the beginning, was a smaller thing in proportion to the Lubavitch in general. But with time, it became more and more of its. It became bigger and bigger, to the point that everything else got swallowed up into it, or you could be swallowed up into it. So, for example, you brought up Alter, like the Alter becoming a yeshiva, a destination where now people are. Now there's so now there are Bachim coming from Alter to YG, telling younger Bachrim, and there were other Alter Bachrim going to other yeshivas telling younger Bachrim about it. Now those younger Bachrim come to Alter, and then Alter gets bigger, and now there are more people going out from Alter, right? That's how critical mass is built, and so Lubavitch becomes more and more. Like, it's not just that it became more Rebbe-centric, it became like more core heavy, like the center of gravity becomes bigger and bigger, where like you're either in it or you're out of it, right? You're either in the core, you're either in the arum, like the way you called it, the arum, right? There's an arum. There's essentially a line, a periphery, either you're inside or you're outside it, which didn't exist earlier, and you know, like almost the irony of it is that it builds and builds towards that. If at least the story that you're telling me and other stories that I've heard, it became more and more stronger. The core became more and more intense and more enveloping with the years, and then suddenly it disappears. And so or suddenly it fragments, and the question becomes, now what? Now what? Because the Rabbi Groner that you described, talking about his memories back in the day of the Frierdiker Rebbe, and who else did you say?
Reb Shmuel. But still very present, you know, in the Simchas Torah and Tkiyas of Melbourne and his Nosach. That's the old school model, right? There's the high moments, but you're still very present outside of those moments. But then it changes over the decades to the point where everything is centralized. Everything is very, very close to the core. And then the question becomes, now what? Like what happens? That to me is how I read it. So, meaning, if I need to understand better what you're asking.
I haven't asked the question
about
yet.
The core. When you're talking about the core, you haven't really defined what that core is, and I don't know if you're describing a disintegration, an expansion, or what transition are you describing?
No, so first the core is, meaning the core is, let's say the Rebbe's Chutzner, or the what you phrase as the arum, right? Right. It doesn't seem like there was an arum that you were aware of when you were growing up. There was a Rebbe in New York. There's a 770 in New York. Yeah. But I could be, you know, we're a Lubavitch community here. We're not missing out on the arum, like the story that you described, where like you're talking about Simchas Torah in 770. So I was trying to explain to you how amazing it was in Melbourne. You're like, you don't get it. Like you're on the outside here. You're not in the. But he doesn't. At the time, he doesn't realize that. Right. Right. The arum, or this kind of periphery, this almost you could call it lahavdil, a blast radius, but in a good sense, right? There's a blast radius. There's a explosion of energy, and then there's how far it reaches. And either you're inside it or you're outside it, but it's there. It's a real thing, right? It would seem like in the beginning, it was less. The blast radius was smaller, right? And so it was there, but most people were outside of it, and so that was the norm. With time, the blast radius gets bigger and bigger. Now more and more people are inside of it, right? And so if you're out, it's normal to be inside, not to be outside. Yeah, that's what it sounds like to me. I mean, what do you is that an accurate reading? Yeah, you know, it's funny because you know we're talking about the mems, and you know when you speak to, let's say, or you listen to, I don't know, like the Shleim Mizrachis of the world, the Leibel Shapiros of the world, you know, to them, it's like, it's the chufs, you know, it's the roaring chufs, and then you speak to Chassidim from the Lamets, you know, it's the roaring Lamets, like this was the Tkufa, you know, this was it, you know, for me, okay, it's the Mems, and then the early nuns, but it was definitely, the core is much, almost elite, you know. Elite. Almost, yeah. Earlier on, yeah, and it just became more accessible to more people as everything expanded and grew on every level. Look, I think that in a way, and that's why I said Gimel Tammuz was very, you know, confronting in terms of how much did you internalize, because the nature of an arum is also that you can just get sort of swept up in it, right? You know. I think what's unique today with
the lack of that arum is that, today the big thinking of today's ownership. We're going to own, today's generation wants to own its Yiddishkeit and own its Iskashrus, which means almost like I want to opt in.
Right.
And in many ways, you could argue that that's healthier, stronger, and more sustainable model. Truth is, I spoke about this morning. I mean, today's Hayom Yom. What's Amitis Iskashrus? It's the Rebbe chose this entry, even though it's a word from Friedrich Rebbe. Learning my Maimonim, aligning yourself with my thinking. So, in a way, even when the arum was there, but the real Amitis Iskashrus always was to internalize it through learning and through, learning the Maimonim, learning the Sichos, aligning yourself with the Rebbe's thinking, how he sees the world. And obviously, you align yourself with that, but today you have to choose more to go that route.
Right.
You're not sort of being carried. It's interesting that the Rebbe said, Toshin Yudalef, this is not going to be a party, and I'm not going to just flap my wings for you to just sit on and do all the work for you. But the reality is that the Rebbe's presence was so powerful and such a magnet and created such an arum that it wasn't that hard to hold on to the klamkit, at least at the arum level. So I think that...
was there a tension then? Do you remember there being a tension then of being swept away with arum versus, let's say, learning a mimer? Was that a tension or just...
look, the mashpiyim, certainly some of the Fabrengens, hammered this a lot. That, you can't allow Hiskashrus to just be, Chitzenizdik and then just, the whole arum and the avir. You have to internalize it. You got to learn it. This is Chabad. You got to internalize it. So that, the gauntlet of that was thrown out, obviously. But I think that overall it was just, way just too premature to really, at least to know how much you truly internalized it, because the arum was so strong and so powerful. Mashen came today, either it's real or it's not sustainable.
Mm. So how would you? This is to me like the most fascinating. This is like it's the nub of everything, because like so many people will start the question or start the story at, let's say, Gimel Tammuz, which is like an obvious point of before and after, right? Everything changed on that day, but to me, obviously, Gimel Tammuz came after other things that happened. Like there was something that you mentioned, how on Suchas Torah Lamed Ches, when the Rebbe became more of a focal point or more in focus in Melbourne, which makes a lot of sense, because suddenly you can't take him for granted anymore. And
Yeah.
This is life. When a dear one is suddenly, is not well, you suddenly realize how much they mean to you. And so, like, that's a moment where that's a before and after moment in Lubavitch thinking. And then what you're describing here, this kufa of the arum and the arum becoming so powerful and so enveloping, that's also a before and after, right? And like, you can't trace everything and every question and every tension to Gimel Tammuz, right? There was other points as well.
Yeah.
And to me, so much of today's discussion is not only about before or after Gimel Tammuz, it's also before or after the arum. To me, it's just a fascinating thing. Is a Lubavitcher part of an arum? Is that what makes you a Lubavitcher? Or is a Lubavitcher, like you described, more an individual who, earns it for himself or herself? And the reason I bring it up again is because how does one, you mentioned you have to start that this generation has no choice but to acquire it for themselves. How do you do that without basically moving on from that arc, building towards the arum? Because that's something that a lot of people kind of bring up. Where, like, on one hand, I want to live in the present. I want to make it my own. But if that comes at the cost of, let's say, moving on from this Der Shvi Arum, I feel that might be the wrong thing. Or I feel like, at this point, you see what I'm saying?
For me, if I'm understanding correctly, at least, a long learning curve. How to? You say Gimel Tammuz changed everything, yeah, but not right away. It took at least for me a long time to even confront what happened, let alone process what happened and the implications of that in so many different areas. And different people dealt with it differently.
Right.
Some still, nothing happens. It's just, So I think that one of, and we were not at all, couldn't have been really prepared,
right,
trained for educating a new generation in the quote post Gimel Tammuz world. Mm. The natural default position of all parenting is you parent the way you were brought up, or you parent, or you raise, or you try to exert influence coming from the place that most influenced you, and in the same way. So it took me a while to realize that while I could share a lot about what I experienced and so on and so forth, and for me it's deeply personal. For someone else, it's like, okay, these are your nostalgic memories, but this is it's not my reality.
You realized that right away?
No, it took me a while to realize that, in a way, trying to impose or force a reality and a level of certain type of iskashrus that doesn't necessarily talk to the next generation, and as time progresses, even more so. Like, so for example, and I spoke about this to a group of educators, it's one thing for the counselors of Camp Gan Yisrael, Tafshin, in the nuns, writing songs like, where is the hand to all these gaguim,
with the Dylan,
yeah. Okay, because they sold it up.
Right. It was real. Natural. It was real.
Yeah.
It was very real. Yeah.
Can you really expect a kid who's born after Gimel Tammuz to? And I think in a way it sometimes sets it maybe somewhat of a failure, or like I'm not feeling it this way, so I don't match up. Mm-hmm. Maybe Skashrus is not for me, and I missed the boat.
Yep.
So
I can speak for experience, by the way.
Okay, so I think that for me, this was a learning curve. Your uncle, your Zayda, actually, Avramel, once spoke. One of the first Gimel Tammuz, after Gimel Tammuz, I think it was there. He spoke about the data Iya and the data Shmiya. And he said, yeah, those of us who saw what we saw were the data Iya. And we certainly have a responsibility to share what we saw. And but this is the data Shmiya, and it's a new generation. And the truth is that he was comparing it to the data that saw Matan Torah, to the data that actually marched into Eretz Yisrael, the data Gula with Yeshua as a whole new generation. They were not actually at Matan Torah. This is a whole new generation. It's the data Shmiya. So, no, I remember exactly. So I think it was 2 points. One, that yes, you do have an obligation, but you also have to appreciate this is data Shmiya. It's a different generation, and they're actually going to be the ones who are going to cross the threshold into Gula. So not to, in any way, look down at the Deit HaShmiya, and they shouldn't feel like, man, what you missed. I mean, that's just not obviously an inspiring way to live like, I missed the glory years, So it was very challenging for someone who was in the quote-unquote glory years to not convey that sort of sentiment. So it took, for me, it was just a learning curve to learn to appreciate a different generation. The scholarship is different, and to appreciate it coming from a different vantage point, from a different standpoint, different experience.
Amazing. Yeah, it kind of brings me back to something earlier you said about that conversation you had with your friend in Australia about comparing Hakafis 770 to Hakafis in Australia, and in so many ways that is such a symbolic conversation of conversations that happen today, right? Of, like, there's this tension of, like, can you have, like, for example, you open up a Deher magazine, for example, and I'm not trying to criticize them. I think they do a lot of good work, but, like, everything is about the past, right? And so, and maybe they'll say that's what they're intending to be, like, that's the role that they're serving. But, like, does anybody today talk about Rosh Hashanah of Pei Aleph, what it meant to them? Like, this is what happened for me on Rosh Hashanah Pei Aleph, right? And if they do bring it up, whether it's to someone who, like yourself, who was there at at one of the Rebbe's Tekiyas, or whether they're speaking to someone who's very, into the Yemanim of back in the day, will that other person give him space or her space to have an experience, in Pei Aleph in 2021 or 2024, right? And I think that tension is very much alive, but I'm not saying that there's no value in it. I think there's immense value in it, because a present and a future that discards the past is not worth much, right? And that's in general, and in particular, it would be the same. What I'm saying is there room for, like, I think the question is there room, is there space to celebrate the present as well? Or
well, look,
that's
I don't know about the hair, but if you read, if you subscribe to
I don't want to talk about there. I'm just saying.
No, I'm saying if you subscribe to Chabad, they have Yemanim about Tishrei this year and what that experience, was like. Yeah, every year since Gimel Tammuz, full on Yemanim.
Yemanim where?
In Chabad.
Like of what? Like what happened where? In
770, Rosh Hashanah, whatever descriptions, and I'm not talking about crazy, stuff.
Right.
Just 100%. I mean, I look at it and I have mixed feelings about. Okay, describing Vav Tishrei. Vav Tishrei, there was a Fabringen, Shlem Zarchi, and a panel that talk about Zichrenes of Vav Tishrei. And like it's like.
See, that's a problem. A present.
But that's the present. But that's Vav Tishrei. Whatever. Pei Aleph. Okay.
But a record of the present that only remembers the past is going to be a problem. That's what I'm touching at. Now, do I have a better solution? I don't know that I have a better solution. I just think that is ultimately the question. Ultimately, the question is, can it? Lubavitch was building so much, as you've described today, was building more and more towards this kind of crescendo of a very powerful arum. Like, it sucked everybody in, right? It's not nothing new I didn't hear anything new in that sense today, but I heard, like, it was another corroborating account of it, and it was very compelling how you described it. And so everybody got sucked into an arum, and so how do you become an individual? How do you reclaim or find your individuality without feeling that you're discarding that big thing that was part of being Lubavitcher, which was being part of the arum? You see, like so, if a person's, like, even I remember like Rosh Hashanah, for example, like, because to be fair, I think if one's objective, you go to 770 or the oil, and at least when I was there were plenty, and the majority of people where we're taking it very, very seriously, davening seriously, Tehillim and all these things. But, at the Oil, and I don't want to name anybody, but there was also a strain of, I think also 770, there's a parallel, a strain of kind of like, of this cynicism or this tension of like, what's this Rosh Hashanah B'chlal? There's no tkiyas, there's no nothing, like what are we even doing here?
Mm-hmm.
And, I guess now that I'm asking the question and thinking out loud, I don't think they're the majority, so maybe I've already answered the question. I think ultimately people will live in the present. Whatever you do, whatever you're going to try, they're going to live their life.
So to that point, first of all, I think in terms of arum today, I think that probably the biggest arum in Lubavitch today is shlichus. The kinos.
Right.
It's probably the biggest arum that you want to be, at least if you want to be a part of that. But, how you ask this question, well, how do you reclaim your individuality? I think that it's happening organically. And I think that it's part of the Gula process. Gula means fully manifested. And Gula means, we don't have time to get into all philosophical discussion about bittul, and what that really means, and I think it's gotten a bad rap, because I don't think bittul means the negation of self. I think bittul means seeing yourself in a larger context.
Your father took care of that conversation.
I did, spoke about bittul. We'll see if we agree. There's one mimer that actually sticks out. What the Rebbe actually says, there's a mailan bittul hayesh over bittul b'metzias.
Sure.
Right, because the beauty is there's the yesh, but there's the bittul. So really,
that's also coming from outside.
Yeah. So the truth is that, as the way the Rebbe described Mashiach, the Rebbe said, Mashiach, right, is gematria, shliach with your esakech nefesh. Now, what does that mean, shliach with your esakech nefesh? It means, yeah, you're a shliach, but it's your esakech nefesh, which means you're not getting lost in this larger mission. I'm just a nothing, nobody. I'm just a shliach. I have no identity. I'm just a transparent, conveyor of light. No, with your esakech nefesh. In other words, you're not a stirat elikus. Your metzius is not a stirat elikus. And Adarab, they gave you esakech nefesh. You utilize it, manifest it. That's Geula. And that's what's happening today as we are transitioning into Geula. This is a whole generation that's finding its voice. And then that is developing and cultivating a deeper connection to Yiddishkeit. That's not afraid to ask and to challenge and to probe. And I think on the other side of that is something deeply authentic and deeply real.
So let me ask you a final question.
Mm-hmm.
You're blessed with many children, many grandchildren.
Just starting my grandchildren career, Baruch Hashem, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
But you have.
Yeah, I have. Can I not?
Yeah, you have children, Baruch Hashem.
Yeah.
They're like you said that they're a Shemiah. They're the generation that will, God willing, outlive and outachieve over. They will take it to the next level.
Mm-hmm.
Are you happy for them that they're growing up in this post-Gimel Tammuz time, or do you feel sad for them? Maybe this is too personal of a question, but I feel like asking it about, it's very abstract, talking about these people growing up after Gimel Tammuz until it becomes about your kids. Because you care about your kids. Are you sad for them that they missed out on it? Are you happy that they're growing up in this era?
So I don't think I have a thought in terms of, happy or sad for them. But as I mentioned before, in the immediate aftermath of Gimel Tammuz, I felt a desperate urgency to do my best to convey the skashus and the intensity of it all, to make sure that it carries over, And then, as my children got older, I realized more and more that, they're growing up in a different time. And so you have to learn to appreciate their world and their reality, and shouldn't have They should not feel for a single second, God forbid, that you feel sad for them, and that they, that they missed, like I said, the glory years and missed the boat. And the Eibishter self runs the world, as we believe, and if we believe this is the time you're born in, this is the best time of your life. This is your time. This is your moment. It's and it's full of beautiful opportunity. So, no, we're not going to lament anything. We're moving forward, and embrace your life, your story, your time, your reality, and be the best version of a chassid that you can be now.
On that note, thank you very much. It's a wonderful conversation. Thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you.
And much hatzlacha.
Amen. Thank you.
The music for this podcast comes from the album Repentant Doors by Oren Sor and Nadav Bachar and is used with their permission.